Uzumaki was one of the most hyped anime, not just of this season but of the entire year. Based on a story recognized as one of the best horror tales of all time, written by the legendary Junji Ito. It featured an art style unlike anything ever seen in anime, and had production values that were set to revolutionize the industry. Episode 1 delivered on these promises. It looked like it was ripped straight from the manga, made your skin crawl, and was genuinely terrifying. Fans loved it. But then, something happened that ruined the experience for many. Despite being under production for over 5 years, the quality began to drop rapidly, and what could have been a masterpiece ended up becoming something now universally hated. So what went wrong? How did Uzumaki go from being so highly anticipated to becoming such a disappointment? However, before we dive into the actual anime, I want to talk a bit about Junji Ito. It's important to understand who the author of Uzumaki is, what he does, and why it has seemed impossible to adapt any of his work. Born in Akatsukawa, Japan in 1963, Ito developed a love for horror at a young age, drawing inspiration from horror manga, classic horror films, and occult movies. Despite initially pursuing a career in dentistry, he eventually became a full-time manga artist. His career took off in the 1980s with Tomie, a story about a girl who repeatedly dies and comes back to life, exploring themes of death and immortality. Tomie ran for 13 years and won the Kazuo Umezu Prize, cementing Ito's place in the world of horror manga. Since then, he has created numerous works focused on body horror, cosmic horror, and the grotesque. However, a recurring problem with his work is that they seem impossible to adapt to other mediums. No matter the adaptation, it's often considered subpar compared to the original manga. This is largely because what makes Junji Ito's manga so good and terrifying isn't necessarily the story, but rather his visuals. His greatest strength lies in his intricate and unsettling artwork, which creates an atmosphere of dread through meticulous attention to detail. His horrifying imagery relies on subtle line work, disturbing facial expressions, and grotesque body transformations that are difficult to capture with the same intensity in other formats. Ito is also a master of slow burn horror, where tension gradually builds through small, creeping details until it culminates in a shocking moment. This pacing often gets altered in adaptations, as they tend to speed up the storytelling or skip important moments that contribute to the atmosphere. However, this was all set to change with something new. In 2019, a surprising announcement revealed that one of his most popular works, Uzumaki, would be receiving an anime adaptation. While previous adaptations of his work had largely failed, many assumed Uzumaki would suffer the same fate. But everything changed when Adult Swim dropped the first trailer, and every scene looked like it had been lifted straight from the manga. People were hyped, but the anime faced multiple delays. Finally, after 5 years, it was released. The first episode of Uzumaki begins by introducing us to Kirie Goshima and her boyfriend Shuichi Saito, who live in the small, foggy town of Kurozucho. The creepy atmosphere is felt right away, with the show setting the tone to chilling visuals and a slow, unsettling soundtrack. As Kirie narrates her experience with a strange spiral obsession that is slowly taking over the town, we meet Shuichi's father, Mr. Saito, whose obsession with spirals becomes the focus of the episode. At first, his obsession seems harmless and even a bit weird. He is seen collecting spiral-shaped items like snail shells and pottery, but as the episode goes on, his fixation turns dangerous. In a particularly creepy scene, Shuichi's father starts spinning his eyes in a spiral, a small but disturbing sign of what's coming. His obsession grows and he spends hours staring at spirals, leading to his terrifying transformation at the end of the episode. His body literally becomes a spiral, twisting and bending in a horrifying display of Junji Ito's signature body horror. The episode does a great job of showing the main theme of Uzumaki, obsession. Mr. Saito's descent into madness represents how obsession, especially with something as simple as a shape, can take over your mind and body. The spiral, which shows up throughout both the episode and the whole series, stands for losing control and sanity. By focusing on something as ordinary as a shape, the story creates a feeling of unease, taking something familiar and turning it into something scary. This theme is what makes Uzumaki different from traditional horror, focusing more on mental breakdowns than typical scary moments. One of the most impressive things about the first episode is how closely it matches Ito's original manga. The animation team worked hard to keep Ito's unique, detailed drawing style, which is known for being tough to adapt to animation. While most anime shows rely on smooth, flowing animation, Uzumaki uses a more still approach, which might feel unusual but perfectly suits the creepy atmosphere. The frames often look like direct images from the manga, maintaining the intricate and disturbing beauty of the illustrations. The style is especially clear in Mr. Saito's transformation. The way his body twists into a spiral is taken directly from Ito's panels, with each moment captured capturing the slow, painful process. The detail in his skin, the way his muscles bend down naturally, everything is drawn with incredible care, forcing the viewer to face the horror up close. The slow pace of his change contrasts with modern, fast-paced horror, letting the tension build over time. That combined with the eerie sound of swirling wind and faint whispers add to the creepy feeling, creating a sense of spirals before we even see them on the screen. This first episode was highly successful and set incredibly high expectations. It had a production value and a vibe that had never been seen before. However, when people saw what the next episode had to offer, it quickly fell apart. After the first episode, it seemed like we were about to witness a modern classic. Someday we would look back as one of the most unique projects in anime history. However, with episode 2, everything quickly changed. While the first episode was praised for its faithfulness to Junji Ito's original manga, the second episode felt rushed and disjointed. The tension that had been expertly built up in episode 1 fizzled out, replaced by pacing issues and a sudden drop in the quality of animation. One of the most glaring problems was the animation itself, where the first episode had excelled in replicating Ito's intricate, unsettling art style. Episode 2 felt like a downgrade. The level of detail that had made the body horror so terrifying was noticeably absent. The character designs appeared flatter, less expressive, and overall less detailed, with disturbingly awkward character movements. The atmospheric slow burn horror that defined the first episode was replaced by choppy transitions and awkward pacing, breaking the immersion. Additionally, the plot progression felt uneven. Instead of carefully building up the sense of dread and madness central to the story, episode 2 rushed through key moments, leaving little room for the creeping terror we had come to expect. They adapted twice as many chapters as before, which made no sense. There were side stories like the Jack in the Box one that they could have left out without a problem, allowing more focus on the main characters. One of my main critiques is how the show glossed over the psychological aspects of the story. In the manga, the down's descent into madness was gradual, with the spiral symbol slowly consuming every aspect of life. But in this episode, the focus shifted more towards shock value than the unsettling build-up of tension. The exact opposite of why Junji Ito is so beloved. People were understandably outraged by this episode. It looked bad and was paced poorly, especially considering the high standards set by the first episode. Given that they had 5 years to just make 4 episodes, you have to wonder, what went wrong? Well, there were quite a few issues with this anime. The biggest one is that episode 1 and episode 2 were made by almost completely different teams. The most important person missing from episode 2 and onward was Nagahama Hiroshi. He was the director, wrote the storyboard, did key animation, in-between animation. He was involved in almost every part of the project, and his absence was felt immediately in the second episode. While we don't know exactly what happened, people in the industry have suggested that he was banned from attending meetings and being involved in production. Likely because he wasn't given the resources needed to bring his vision to life. That is bad enough, but what made it worse is that they brought in a director, whom I won't name as my intention isn't to shame people, who has been blacklisted in the industry for being incompetent and difficult to work with. Yet somehow he keeps getting work in anime. But if you don't believe me, here is another prime example of his amazing work in episode 2 of Tower of God season 2, the worst episode in the entire series. In my opinion though, the biggest issue wasn't the people working on it, but rather Adult Swim and the lack of understanding of what the budget needed to create something great. This year they produced another anime, Ninja Kamui, which faced a similar fate, starting off strong but falling apart once the director wasn't involved in the animation process. The executive producer even acknowledged that someone behind the scene was to blame. But when you're the executive producer behind 2 anime that suffered the same downfall, it's hard not to point a finger at you. If next year's Lazarus, another promising looking anime from Adult Swim, faces the same fate, it will be obvious who's at fault. Thanks to its shortcomings, Uzumaki will likely remain a topic of discussion for years to come. It serves as a case study in both the potential and the pitfalls of adopting beloved manga. While Junji Ito's work seems perfect for animation, Uzumaki demonstrates how difficult it can be to translate his intricate, atmospheric horror into another medium without losing the essence that made the original so powerful. While we all believe this would finally be the moment when a Junji Ito manga gets a good adaptation, I guess we will have to wait a little longer. But if you want to see an anime from last season that actually had an outstanding production, click here. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. See you next week. Goodbye.